Howdy. Where are we now? So this is about maritime situational awareness. The modern threat to naval warships and commerce is more likely to come from low-tech small craft than warships or submarines. That means tools that help maritime surveillance analysts identify suspicious activity are extremely valuable. Of course, maritime surveillance runs the gamut from networking to frequency coordination to simple speech patterns to what channel are we on to just conversations at sea. To help us talk about it today, we have two very distinguished guests. First is Commodore Keith Blount, the Maritime Component Commander and Deputy Commander of Combined Maritime Forces, Royal Navy here in Bahrain. If you want to come up, sir. And next is Bob Schoeffling. Hi, Bob. The Senior Business Development Manager for Maritime Surveillance Aircraft for Boeing. Just a brief bit about both of these distinguished gentlemen. Commodore Blount is a helicopter pilot, was a helicopter pilot, Sea King's Gazelles, 3 commands at sea, a patrol ship, a frigate, the helicopter carrier HMS Ocean, which I believe is the ship right above the V at the top there, his former command. He's had quite a number of distinguished posts out here in the Gulf region. He's had Chief of Staff appointments in CTF 151 and the European Union's Operation Atalanta, conducting counter-piracy operations. He spent over 2 years as a flag officer, working for Flag Officer Sea Training, FOST, in the UK. His tour out here is coming to an end shortly. He'll return to head up the Fleet Air Arm, and the responsibility of finishing Britain's first 2 aircraft carriers in quite, maybe, 2 generations will rest upon his shoulders. And he's rather slim at that, so that's even impressive. Mr. Schoeffling is had another whole different experience in situational awareness. He grew up in the EP3, P3 intelligence gathering aircraft and maritime surveillance aircraft community. He's worked for Boeing for the last 9 years or so. He's had key roles in the P8 program, the new maritime surveillance aircraft. He was chief person developing the P8I for India, and he's now working for the maritime surveillance aircraft program for Boeing. So gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. I'm going to go back and forth here. We'll start with Commodore Blount. So what does maritime situational awareness mean in the context of a modern mission?
Okay. What does it mean in the context of a modern maritime mission? Well, I think that there's a sort of a classic definition that you would be taught if you were at a naval college, in that it's the fusion of information from a variety of different sources, and you mentioned some of them in your opening speech. It could be visual, could be electromagnetic, could be acoustic, and wedding all of those together to create an understanding, a truth of the maritime environment in which you are operating. And you can define it in time and or in space. So typically you would want it to be not only something that is a 24/7, 365-day a year pursuit, i.e. it's something that doesn't only involve operations in war or conflict, it involves operations in peace as well. But it's also something that you would define in space, in the sense that you would want it to be over as wide an operating area as was either relevant or possible. And you would want it to be as up-to-date as possible as well, as timely as possible. They would all be sort of classic definitions or a classic characterization of what it is. But I think it goes beyond that. And I think in this region in particular, I've learned that true maritime domain awareness, maritime situational awareness, depends on other things as well. It depends on your understanding of culture, to a degree understanding of history, understanding of weather patterns, understanding of traffic patterns, the ability to spot instinctively the known from the unknown. And in my position as the Deputy Commander of the Combined Maritime Forces, I've noticed how much better the GCC navies are, for example, at operating and knowing where to operate inside the Gulf than some of the larger navies, because they instinctively understand the environment in which they live, because they have saturated themselves in that understanding for generations. So it's not as straightforward as it at first seems, but what I think we all would agree on is that it's extremely important.
Bob, the maritime domain awareness role, is this a proactive or reactive mission type?
It's actually both, and leveraging something that Commodore said about knowing where to operate. There's always going to be reactive maritime domain awareness. Something has happened, whether it's a piracy event, a terrorist event, an oil spill, there's something has happened. And you have to talk about how quickly and how reliably you can get out there to determine what has happened. So you're reacting to something. But I think the proactive piece is more important than the reactive, because they're tied together, obviously. The more proactive you are doing maritime domain awareness, the less reactive you have to be. And when I say proactive, I'm really speaking towards having that presence, knowing what the pattern of life is, and being able to notice a difference in that pattern of life so that you can predict that there's something that you have to be able to react towards. It's more than just a pattern of life. It's whether it's the ships or the UAVs, the unmanned, the manned aircraft. It could be flying daily missions and counting the number of ships that are in a harbor, or doing some type of signals intelligence, communication intelligence, for example, where you're intercepting some movement in a harbor that would be predictive of boats getting ready to leave that you have an interest in. And with that proactive piece, oftentimes it's the aircraft, the manned aircraft, the unmanned aircraft that are the first responders. And so it comes back to how quickly can you get out there, how long can you stay out there, and how reliably can you make sure that you get off the deck to both be proactive and reactive.
The operating area for this command out here probably involves more different nations than almost any other place in the world. You've got different formations, different organizations, different navies. So as Admiral Miller was talking about this morning, you just have a total multiplicity of operations out here, entities out here. What are the challenges of achieving maritime situational awareness when you have not just a coalition, but coalitions plus different forces all operating in the same area?
I think you characterized the challenge very well, and it's something that consumes a lot of my time in trying to ensure we do get the very best from what we've got, because with so many ships, so many nations, the opportunity is huge, and we would like to think that we would have a completely joined up, networked understanding, which is not always the case. With it, if you take it at its most simplest form, in a warship, when I've certainly been in command, I've been pretty convinced that at any point in the day we've known what's going on around the ship within the capability of the shipborne sensors, and I would include in that the helicopter or whatever. The challenge then comes, even when you're operating within the same nation, of joining up the other services, because this is not just about navies. This is about air forces as well, and to a lesser degree armies in the maritime environment, but not completely so. So even within my own military, there are cultural boundaries between services, some slight differences in tactics and doctrine that make the fusion of information hard, even within one military force. When you expand that across nations, you start running into a lot of other challenges as well. And most of them you would understand readily, but the fact that everybody is operating typically with different information and communications systems that are often interoperable, but equally not. So you find yourself racing down the classification levels until you can only communicate at unclassified level, which is not great for military operations, but we've been quite clever in finding a way around that. For example, in the counter-piracy mission, we have a communication system called Mercury, which is an unclassified, internet-based information sharing system that requires a log-on, which is only issued by one authority, and it then takes you into a relatively secure area of the internet in which you can exchange information. That's been a huge success. You know, the simple fact remains that getting systems to talk to each other is a real challenge. Equally, nations operate under different policies and different political constraints. So it could simply be that one nation is not prepared to share information with another, even if it were able to. And there are some examples of that. I'll use counter-piracy as such an example. Again, you know, we operate in the Gulf of Aden with the NATO, the European Union, and the combined maritime forces, as much as possible, pretty much one union of effort. But then you extrapolate that into the other nations, and you see the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, that are all conducting counter-piracy in a perfectly effective way, but the information flow between us is not as good as it could be in a straightforward military sense, because there are other blockages that prevent it being the case. Even language. In an environment where people are able to use a voice circuit together, language, understanding even of accent. There are parts of the United Kingdom that challenge me as a British officer in understanding their accent, even in my own sort of nation. So out here it becomes difficult. And I think one of the final points I would make is the fact that everybody operates with different levels of technological equipment. And there needs to be a culture of wanting to share. So at the very highest level, we have navies out here operating with quite exquisite unmanned air technology, as an example, and drawing from that huge amounts of data and information. There needs to be a culture of wanting to impart that, wanting to spread that message, because without it, you very quickly find that you're not making the most of what you have. But I would close just by saying, actually, that the counter-piracy mission, you know, has been successful on a number of levels, not least in which the statistic that we haven't had any successful piracy attacks since the middle of 2012. So we're actually heading for 3 consecutive years without a successful pirate attack. I always touch wood when I say that, because I think the conditions are still set for piracy to occur. But actually, if we've got one thing to thank the pirates for, it would be the way in which it has accelerated maritime interoperability, accelerated our mutual understanding of the way in which we operate, and accelerated our way of delivering maritime domain awareness in a very complex battle space. So we've made a hell of a lot of progress, although there's still work to do.
That's good. I think last year when I was out here, I had an interesting discussion with a Royal Navy officer who was a meteorologist working for the British Weather Forecasting Service. And his whole role out here was to do weather forecasting and look at all the conditions really on an hourly basis that might even provide operational intelligence about what sort of sensors might or might not be appropriate for a certain time, depending on the moon, the temperature, the salinity of the water. A whole variety of conditions affect the operation of sensors. So for Bob, I mean, how does the choice of platforms and sensors affect mission effectiveness?
It's pretty key. You could
talk platforms and sensors across, all the various units doing maritime domain awareness, whether it's ships, UAVs, or planes. I'll go to my comfort zone. I'll talk a little bit about some of those capabilities and sensors you'd want on some of your planes. Probably at its simplest to do intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, or airborne maritime domain awareness, you need a single engine, propeller-driven airplane with a pair of binoculars. That's probably at its most simplest. But that doesn't get you very far today. Picking up on a theme that we talked about a little bit earlier of presence, capability, and interoperability. For the presence, you really want an airplane that is reliable. Every time you want it to take off, every time it needs to go either react or be proactive, it needs to be able to take off the deck when you want it to go. You need it to be able to get on station very quickly. You oftentimes want it to be able to fly at high altitudes. You can start talking about those airborne MDA missions in terms of either reacting directly to something that has happened, or when you're being proactive, you could be either overt or covert in your missions. The number of sensors that are available, it's just a wide array. There's just some fantastic sensors out there, from the multi-mode radars to the comment systems to the electro-optics to AIS to the ESM and ELINT systems. I think today's airborne MDR really needs a good mixture of all of those. And not to, I'll talk about the interoperability piece and the communication suites you'd need. But everything is a balance. It's a balance against how much the platform and the sensors cost versus what the government can pay for those. So it's a careful dance, but the trend is to use the smaller aircraft. The large aircraft are great, and you can put a lot of sensors on those, but you'll see across the region is whether they're using single engine turboprops, dual engine turboprops, or even supersized business jets, you want to get the biggest bang for the buck. So how much can you put on that airplane? If you want to go do an overt mission, do you want to fly along a country's coast with your multi-mode radar, using your synthetic aperture radar, and counting the number of ships that are in port? So your adversary knows you're there, but it's a very good mission because you see what they have, you see what may have left port, and it tells your adversary that you're there. You're looking, you're watching what they're doing. Some of the sensors you'd want for that overt mission is you'd want that communications intelligence. You'd want that electronic surveillance measures, so you can intercept their traffic, or you can look at what radars they're emitting. But then the platform comes also into play. Do you have a platform that could emulate a commercial platform, for example? Are you flying your airborne MDA on a jet so that you could go and you could put that jet in some of the regular jet lanes and fly completely quiet while you're observing your adversary? So the right mix of platforms and sensors, it's a dizzying array. You can really get, everything from the small single turboprops to, commercial airliners that have been commercial to military derivatives. But the piece you really need to focus on is that interoperability piece. It's not only getting that information, it's not only determining what your adversary might be doing, but what are you doing with that information? Are you getting it back to the ship? Are you getting it back to the ground station? Is it something that's actionable that you have to get off the airplane right now? So the mix between the platform and the sensors and the communication equipment is especially key to be that proactive maritime domain awareness aircraft.
Okay. Of course, the history of warfare is point, counterpoint, 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 constant leapfrogging of effectiveness. So, Commodore, what sort of threats do you foresee affecting maritime situational awareness in the future? And also, do you see different opportunities to maybe improve it or just affect it?
I think there are plenty of opportunities, and probably more opportunities than threats, to be honest, because I think the technology that we've just heard about is breathtaking. But technology in itself throws a few threats at us. Some of them are sort of linked to interoperability. We've got to be careful that whatever we develop is something that is shareable, connected, networked. But I'm sure technology will sort of like look after that for us. I think it's something that will probably happen. But I do worry a little bit simply just about the availability of information, the amount of information that is now available, and in turn the way in which we process and prioritize that. When I first started to go to sea with the Royal Navy 30 years ago, when we left the harbour, we would sever pretty much all communications with the headquarters. And it was really rather nice. There were no emails, the telephone wouldn't ring, and the way of communicating was only really by signal message. And if you wanted to send a signal, you would have to go and find a signal pad, and you would have to write what you wanted to send in the signal by hand, and then you'd have to take that signal down to the MCO, to the main communications office, where somebody would have to type it up, and then eventually it would be sent. That whole process was a natural filter for the type of information that we sent. And as a result, when the commanding officer used to receive his signals every day, he would read every single one, because there would be an understanding that somebody had gone to all of that effort to write it, and therefore there was a fighting chance that what was within it would be important. In HMS Ocean alone, every single day we were sending and receiving thousands upon thousands of emails. I didn't read hardly any of them, and hardly anybody, well, in fact, nobody, even within their own departments, would have been able to read every single email that was being sent or received. And in my experience, the number of times that we missed an important piece of information actually went up rather than down with the more information that came into the ship, because the really important stuff was getting buried in and around all the non-important stuff. And I think we've just got to watch that, because modern sensors can provide such huge quantities and quality of data. We've just got to make sure that we continue to advance technology in a way that is able to analyze that data on behalf of our sailors and package it into what is the very important and what is the not so important. And that is a challenge, and something which I worry about a little bit. Modern interfaces, the man-machine interface for a sailor with his data panels now is not just one layer as it used to be. It's not just looking into a cathode ray tube projecting a radar picture. There are layer after layer after layer of data that he needs to understand, be able to interpret. That is a threat, I think. But the opportunities are equally wedded to technology. We are learning to develop technologies that have absolutely the right effect in absolutely the right circumstance, and that is providing us the ability to provide almost full motion video 24/7 to whoever wants to see it about any single corner of the battlefield. That sounds wonderful, but actually it has an interesting effect. You know, in the corridors of power in many government ministries of defense, there is a craving for information, and it's not uncommon, certainly in my country, to see very senior people that are, of course, in a position where they are qualified to look at it, watching information that is coming in real time into their office, And it's almost impossible not to try and interact with that information and come up with ideas on how you think it could be done better. That can be a challenge. But as I say, I think the opportunities outweigh that, and I think there are opportunities in the legacy of counter-piracy that we need to lever to make sure that the lessons we have learned through counter-piracy are remembered and continue to be used in this region. And I think even within the combined maritime forces, you know, we have Saudi Arabia now commanding CTF 152 inside the Gulf. And going back to one of my earlier points on the awareness of sailors based on their cultural understanding and their environmental understanding, we have seen great strides taken by CTF 152 because of
نرحب بكم في معرض الدفاع الدولي آيدكس 2015 وندعو السادة حاملي بطاقات دعوة حضور إعادة حفل الافتتاح للتوجه لأخذ مقاعدهم في مدرج أدمك وشكرا.
So we've made great strides with CTF 152. I'm thrilled that Kuwait are going to come in and command 152 behind Saudi Arabia, and I hope that we can keep the GCC in command of 152, because it's not only having the right piece of equipment for the job, it's about having the right commander for the job as well. They're both equally valid when it comes to maritime domain awareness.
I think the issue you raise about information overload, and that the improvements of technology and just pulling so much information in so fast from so many quarters, and how do you process that?
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to IDEX 2015. May I now invite those of you who have an invitation to attend the IDEX 2015 opening ceremony repeat to kindly make their way to the grandstand and take your seats. Thank you.
Okay. But this is an excellent topic to bring up. I'm actually interested, Bob, you were a mission systems operator in ISR aircraft for a long time. You have a long-standing experience in this. You've also been developing two very sophisticated ISR aircraft to follow on to that. What is that increased?
السيدات والسادة ضيوفنا الكرام، نرحب بكم في معرض الدفاع الدولي آيدكس 2015 وندعو السادة حاملي بطاقات دعوة حضور إعادة حفل الافتتاح للتوجه لأخذ مقعدهم في مدرج أدمك وشكرا.
At the risk of one more coming at an unspecified time. But from your point of view as a mission systems person, and now one who's overseeing mission systems development, here it is.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to IDEX 2015. May I now invite those of you who have an invitation to attend the IDEX 2015 opening ceremony repeat to kindly make their way to the grandstand and take your seats. Thank you.
If you don't have an invitation, you can just stay right here. Thank you. But how do you see that evolution over time?
I agree with the Commodore. The availability of information, whether you're at the CIC on a ship and you're getting it from every other ship and every other airplane in the area, is daunting. And I think there's a danger of information overload. You can really look at it in two ways. You can look at it in the macro, you know, what the CIC is seeing, you know, the total picture. And you can look at it in the micro, what the people on the airplane are seeing. And the people on the airplane are getting both the onboard sensors and they're also getting the offboard information. But we really see that really as an advantage. The ability to assimilate information on that airplane when you've got your sensors and you're picking up tracks with your sensors and you're getting that offboard data, so you're correlating them to data links, and then maybe you're fusing your tracks with those data links and you're sending it back to the ship saying, yes, that data link is this track and it's going this track course and speed. There's been some really wonderful advances in mission systems and having fully integrated mission systems. When I first started flying the P3s, I think what the Commodore said, I used to have this big green monochrome monitor, 2D, and there was very little integrated data. A lot of it was just very federated data. And so you literally had to look at your monochrome monitor, maybe 2 or 3 others, and you had to make the mental connection, well, that should be this, and that should be this, so let me try to build a composite track off of that. We've gone a long ways past that. We have mission systems out there that have all your sensor data, all your onboard data, all your offboard data that are showing up on an integrated tactical picture. And that integrated tactical picture really gives the operators on the airplane incredible situational awareness. It allows them to assimilate what's going on faster. It also has some other intended benefits. It allows you to search a larger area in a faster amount of time because you've got everything right there in front of you. It allows you to possibly put less crewmen on the airplane because everything is fully integrated. So you get to see the whole battle space picture at once. It can get cumbersome because it requires a lot of management because you can be overloaded by the information that's coming in. So you've got to be well trained. You've got to be able to filter out what is necessary. But by and large, the integrated mission systems that we're seeing on the airplane, kind of going back to the micro, that feed into the macro, the ships that are in control, are a far cry better than some of the systems that are flying, that have flown previously, and some that are flying today. And they just keep getting better and better. The algorithms that allow you to, whether you want to call it autocorrelation or to fuse data together, are just night and day from somebody looking at 3 disparate pieces of information and making the judgment, well, those are probably the same. You've got algorithms that are looking within, tenths of degrees or hundreds of degrees of position and course and speed, and helping you put that integrated battle picture together at once. So there's really no going back. You can still buy federated systems out there where you've got an EOIR display, a radar display, and a moving map, and they're not tied together. But the wave of the future is having all this piece of integrated data right in front of you. It makes you a better operator. It makes your platform a more viable platform, and the advantages of being able to cover more area in shorter time with fewer people and potentially with fewer platforms is one of the better consequences of that.
Okay. And really just one for both of you. Obviously, the last 10 years, we've seen an absolute explosion of unmanned systems of all types. Certainly aircraft, we have very small aircraft, Pumas and Scan Eagles operating from ships almost incessantly, all the way up to Global Hawk and broad area maritime surveillance, the U.S. Navy's Triton version of that, which is still in development, but fielding is getting closer all the time. There are, obviously surface systems, below surface systems. I mean, this is all having a major impact on situational awareness all over. I mean, where's the most useful area in there? Is it just all taken together? I mean, where do you see that is aerial surveillance sort of, do you see a leveling off of development now and there, and maybe more development coming with subsurface or surface systems? Or is it all just moving ahead relentlessly?
I think for the time being, it's still moving ahead relentlessly. I think, we've, in the Royal Navy, we've embraced unmanned technology with UAVs in the Army, the Navy, and indeed the Air Force, of course. Unmanned underwater vehicles as well. We are using those as well now, and I've seen all of those systems operating with tremendous effect out here. And of course, UAVs provide you, if we're thinking of UAVs, and in fact UUVs as well, because we typically use UUVs in mine warfare, it allows you to put them in harm's way in a way that you simply would not with manned vehicles. So I still think there is sort of almost rampant development of unmanned vehicles across the domains. But I do sense that there is a logical point at which they will not completely remove the man from the cockpit, simply because the most sophisticated sensor on this planet, and likely to remain so, I would suggest, for some time, is indeed the human brain, connected to the human eye, connected to the human ear. And that very, very unique capability is one that I draw on regularly. So I can certainly use unmanned technology to get me into the right ballpark, but when it actually comes to a particular nuance in what something is doing or how it is achieving it, a particular nuance in the interpretation of information that is coming in, I still rely on humans to do that. So I don't see them as completely cornering the market, but I certainly see there's some way to go before we realize exactly where the marker will be drawn between unmanned and manned systems.
Yeah, I'd agree, Commodore. There's tremendous uses for the unmanned underwater vehicles, unmanned surface vehicles, unmanned area vehicles. There's got to be a good balance between them. There's the danger that we see sometimes where a country will become enamored with an unmanned vehicle, but not oftentimes realizing that there's a tremendous logistical tail that goes with that unmanned vehicle. And sometimes when they go down that road, it'll be at the expense of being able to fly the manned missions. I also see, one of the future trends is from underwater to surface to in the air to satellite, all these unmanned and manned and satellites being able to talk and interoperate with each other. From the aircraft being able to use those unmanned vehicles as external sensors. So there will be a balancing point. I don't think we've come to that great balancing point yet, but it's...
سيدات والسادة ضيوفنا الكرام، نرجو الانتباه. ستقام العروض البحرية الحية لمعرض نافديكس في تمام الساعة 2 ظهرا. ندعوكم للتوجه نحو منصة العروض في مرسى أدنك لمتابعة العروض الممتعة وشكرا.
So trying to close very quickly before the next announcement, it's fascinating to watch this technology come, to watch the advances in the sensors in the aircraft.
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon.
I think that's all I had to say.
May I have your attention, please? The naval demonstrations at NAVDIX are due to commence at 2 p.m. You are kindly requested to make your way to the grandstand area at Adnik Marina for the demonstrations. Thank you.
And on that note, I'd like to thank both of our panelists. You both were excellent. Thank you to NAVDEX, the IDEX organizers, and of course the government people of the United Arab Emirates. Thank you, folks.